I'm going to go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. I'm Kathy Palmer, the Executive Director for the Travel and Tourism Research Association. We want to welcome you to today's webinar, 15 Favorite Findings. Destination researchers share their favorite research presented by our TTRA partner, SMARInsights. TTRA unites university academics, professional practitioners, research experts, the best and the brightest from travel and tourism research community. If you're not a member, we encourage you to join us. Recent graduates get their first year free. You can learn more about our membership at TTRA.com. And we want to remind you to follow us on social media, visit the TTRA website for information about upcoming webinars and conferences. Before we introduce today's speakers, I want to remind everyone that we're using the Zoom webinar platform. So please drop your questions into the Q&A and we will try to get to them at the end of the session. I'd like to introduce today's moderator, Stephanie Pace-Brown. Stephanie joined SMARInsights team 2 years ago after a couple of decades of working with them as a client. She started her career as a research director for Ohio Tourism and Colonial Williamsburg and was most recently the CEO of Explore Asheville. Thank you, Stephanie.
Hi, thank you, Kathy. And thanks to all of you for joining us here today, or good afternoon or good morning to our West Coast friends. This is such a great turnout, and no doubt that's a testimony to the panelists who have so graciously agreed to present some of their favorite findings today. One of the most rewarding aspects of the work that we get to do every day is seeing how our research resonates with our DMO clients and how it's applied to improve the effectiveness of advertising. So the idea for this webinar was sparked by a recent experience of presenting a brand and image study to a DMO team and hearing them say, "I love that slide." And we love to hear how our clients are interpreting the insights that we provide in the context of their bigger picture. So instead of presenting a study or two from start to finish, we decided to ask partners to share a few favorite findings that have had an impact on the development of their creative and marketing strategies. So I'm going to share my screen and introduce our panelists. We really appreciate all of these panelists who have joined us today. They're all smart and savvy researchers and marketers who have made significant differences in the communities that they are serving. I'm going to introduce them all now and then turn over the presentation to them. We'll take questions at the end, so please post them in the Q&A. Our first speaker is going to be the iconic Donna Karan, who serves as the Executive Vice President of Research and Insights for NYC and Company. She will be followed by the dynamic Dan Roberts, who is relatively new to our industry in the DMO world. He is the Director of Research and Market Intelligence for the Virginia Tourism Corporation. And our final speaker will be the marketing pro who also wears a researcher hat, Brandy Evans, who's the Vice President of Marketing for Visit Wichita. For those of you who aren't familiar with SMARInsights, the company was founded by David Seifert and a partner in 1983. After David led the research department for an advertising agency, Denise Miller joined in those early days after leading 2 CVBs and the state of Indiana tourism office. So tourism advertising is really the roots of our company. Most of you know us as SMARI, short for Strategic Marketing and Research, which was the original name. We became SMARInsights when the 2 founders separated the company and David's team continued to focus on tourism. We're a full-service custom research firm. Our professional researchers deliver every aspect of the process that enables us to often turn research around relatively quickly, and that is often very important to creative testing and advertising-related research. So with that, I will turn this over to Donna Karan.
Thank you, and my apologies. I'm suffering with a slight case of laryngitis, but I'm going to hang in there like a good New Yorker. So I wanted just a little background on who we are and what this was about. NYC and Company is New York City's official destination marketing organization in some form or another. We've been in business since the 1930s. I, amazingly enough, have been there 20 years. I don't know how that happened, but time does fly when you're having fun. This campaign, which I'm going to share with you, was something we were very new at. People always assume New York has a huge budget and that we spend massive amounts on advertising. We don't. We don't have an ad budget, and we generally do not have the opportunity to do what I'm going to share with you today. This campaign came from ARPA funds that were developed and allocated by New York State Senator Schumer, allocated to us by then Mayor Bill de Blasio. We have an in-house creative team that did most of the work with support from outside agencies, particularly on some of the media issues that were involved in this. It's a domestic campaign that I'm going to talk about. And as we discovered, it was strong, and as there was a strong collaboration between marketing and research. And so the results shouldn't be a surprise. They were very, very strong. Next slide, please. So this is what the campaign looked like. This is an out-of-home example, but the campaign ran from June to December 2021 in all forms of media: digital, out-of-home, social, print, video, streaming audio. I'd ask, did you see it? It was all over the country. And did it make you come? Hopefully you came to New York to visit. The idea was, it's time for New York City. What we were looking at was creating a sense of fear of missing out. Even in that second half of 2021, we wanted you to feel a sense of urgency. It is time to come back. As you can see from this ad, we celebrated iconic imagery and clearly words, the Apollo Theater, we have many variations on this image. We celebrated the celebrity content that you can generate in New York. These are on our website. We also, in our videos and print advertising, emphasize the diversity and inclusivity of the tourism sector in New York City. We worked with travel partners, as you can see here, British Airways. The penetration and saturation of this ad, and I'll have a slide on that in a moment, was quite extensive, and that obviously contributed to the effectiveness of it. The idea, come now and plan to come sooner rather than later if you haven't already done it. Next slide. So there were more than 70 pages in the report we got from SMARInsights when the domestic campaign measurement was over. I'm not going to share even a tiny portion of it, but you'll notice that I'm not letting you see all the good news. Those little orange blocks are there for a reason. One, they're going to call out the high points, and two, you're not going to get to read my slides. But the top line here is that we ended up where you always want to end up in an ad campaign. We were successful. This campaign worked. So this page 7 from the report, in other words, give it to them straight up, right up front. The campaign impact was that we affected 2 million trips, $5 billion in spending, $500 million in tax revenue. We reached and worked on increasing awareness of the brand and perceptions of the city. We reached all of our key target markets, especially domestic long haul. New York is a regional destination. Those of you who've heard me talk know I'll say that 1/4 of the US population can drive to New York in a day. So if we're reaching a long haul market in the pandemic, the campaign was having a very strong effect. Want to just make sure, got it. Next slide. So we were so happy with the results that we shared them at our annual meeting and we put them in the annual report. So this is a public document, our annual report, one of the few things the public can see on our website. We highlighted the effectiveness of this campaign. When we shared it at the annual meeting, it was with 700 members, the press, the mayor's office, and other key stakeholders. The idea was to point out that in our often having to beg for money, that if you give us money, New York and our NYC and Company creative team can actually make a difference. In the background, at the same time, we were honing the last details of what was to be and is now an international campaign. Same messaging translated into half a dozen foreign languages, fielded around the globe, primarily Mexico, Canada, Europe. The results of that campaign, which ended just last month in July, are being analyzed now. Again, it worked. A very strong ROI in a much more competitive environment. One, you have to move people internationally. And two, by 2022, when these ads were in the field, more and more destinations were advertising. Next slide. So everything I just shared makes marketers happy, but can you make the head of research happy? We want to know about how this work was done, how effective it was, what was the methodology, what else can we take away from it? How do I run my own analysis? How can I dig into this? And just sharing here, if you can see the blue table on the right-hand side, the scale and scope of where we were located. And one of the things we needed to do and were willing to do was make sure that each of those regional samples was large enough that not only did we have a representative sample going out, did SMARI reweight those results coming back in, but that we could go back in and look at it regionally with sample sizes that were large enough to give us insight on our metro drive and Acela train market and the domestic long haul markets in our key feeders. So the other thing that came, that's good. Next slide. So the other thing that came up, not surprising, even though the campaign had a very common theme, was that different kinds of travelers responded differently to the ads. How did it work and why did it work with these different travelers? These are things that we're digging into now, looking at the more detailed findings. But if you think about your advertising the way my investment advisor tells me I'm supposed to mix and balance my portfolio, what we were trying to do with this first ever major investment in advertising was make sure we understood the key segments, not only geographically, but also traveler profiles and demographically. So not surprising, city travelers respond to city advertising. Younger consumers picked up and were inspired at a higher rate. This bodes well for our future. Highly educated consumers were actually quite responsive to the advertising. Affluent travelers expressed a more positive response, and the LGBTQ market. The affluent traveler issue, New York is generally deemed to be an expensive city, but throughout this period, a lot of things were on sale, but not our hotel rooms. ADR rates have been rising steadily in New York over the period of this campaign. So affluence, the ability to travel, was very, very important. These are all lessons we will continue to test. Next slide. Just digging in for a second on one of the segments. Some of you may remember that 2019 was the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall Uprising, the start of the modern LGBT pride movement. It also, New York City was host to World Pride that brought 4 million visitors in the month of June. Our plans to capitalize on that, keep the momentum going in 2020, obviously came to an abrupt halt in March. So it was very interesting to see how the LGBTQ plus community rated our ads and were inspired by our ads. Usually we are the #1 destination for the community. And it looks like the campaign, even though it wasn't specifically targeted, aspects of it covered the community, covered the diversity of New York. And again, it seemed to work. I have one last slide from the study. Breathe deeply, look at the heat map. Lots going on there. This may be my favorite slide from the whole report. It is a competitive set analysis comparing key attributes of New York across our major comp set cities. Where do we score highest? Where do we have some weaknesses? How do we go and customize, localize, and continue to make this a real useful event that we did this research? We're lowest on things that you can't see under my little secret orange square. That shouldn't surprise anybody. People think big cities like New York aren't safe. They also think we're not welcoming, which if you've ever been here, you know both of those things aren't really quite as the media like to present them. But we're going to compare this set of attributes to the results we also got from our international markets, because we do know that international visitors view New York very differently than many of our domestic visitors do. So last slide. I just want to thank you and invite you to come and visit us. Be like we are, at least for a couple of days. 5 boroughs, kind of like 5 cities in one. And we're going to keep it up. So let me pass this to Dan, and I'm looking forward to his presentation. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's great to be with all of you. Good afternoon from Richmond. So as Stephanie mentioned, I'm a little new to the DMO space. I've been the research director for Virginia Tourism since last March of 2021. And prior to that, I worked for about 4 years in the hotel space. I worked for Choice Hotels in Rockville, Maryland, and ran their STR program too. So that's kind of my background, is really just deep in performance data and market level data as well. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So, we also were the beneficiary in Virginia of ARPA funds. Our recovery was going a little bit slower, just given our kind of exposure to major markets like DC and our reliance on air travel as well. And so we made the case to the General Assembly here in Virginia that we needed a little bit of extra help in order to juice our recovery back to 2019 levels. And so this slide here, this is one of my, this is kind of like the problem that we're trying to solve here, is that, with the benefit of additional funding, one of the clear applications of that is to go into new markets. And we've been in the same 5 DMAs, probably, at least as far as I can go back in our historical files. Those core markets are really of the 95 corridor up to New York City, including Philadelphia and Baltimore, and then DC as well, which would include Northern Virginia, but then also Raleigh, North Carolina too. And so when we were looking at areas for expansion in order to bring in new visitors into Virginia, there's a couple of areas that stuck out, or that stood out, and that we've planned for in the past, but we've never been able to action on those markets. So those tier 2 markets beyond our core I-95 markets would be really the Midwest, and including Boston and other smaller northeastern metros as well. And then the tier 3 aspirational markets are major metros, including Atlanta and Chicago too. So and then Florida too. We actually, just from geolocation data and our visitor profile, Florida is actually like it's a really definitely a top 10 feeder state, including multiple markets within Florida to Virginia too. So that was an interesting finding for us, and we wanted to see what the perception was of Virginia in Florida as well. So you can see here clearly this is the problem to solve for, is that we have a great reputation among the markets that know us well. But as you move a little bit further out from the Northeast, into the Midwest, into the major metros, outside of that, that we could increase our perception as well. But it's interesting to see for tier 2, tier 3, and for Florida, just how proximity plays a role. If you think about the Midwest with Tennessee being very accessible to that region, and then for tier 3, North Carolina also being very accessible to Atlanta too. So, so this is what we're trying to solve for. So if you can go ahead and go to the next slide, this is part of an image study that we did. When I first arrived at the VTC, I did a survey of our stakeholders internally and asked, what do they need from the research department? And one of the things that we needed to do was set a new foundation for just understanding what our competitive stance is relative to our key comp set. So this is a lot. I actually really love this slide. I know it's a lot to look at, but at the same time, it really isn't if you can kind of take a quick step back and notice that there's a lot of Virginia in that first column has a lot of the same color. It's all light green, which means, we're not that polarizing among these different attributes, but we do pretty well across all of them, and we don't have any major weaknesses competitively. And so just talking with the SMARI team, we decided to land on a strategic foundation of abundance. And so abundance as an idea, kind of encapsulating all that we have to offer as a vacation destination. And what I really like about coming down to this idea of abundance is that it's a really graspable idea for people that aren't really in the tourism industry. So as many of you know, we have a new administration, we have a new governor, and they have, very large, very ambitious economic development and job growth goals. And so the idea of abundance in our tourism assets and in the things to do and in the quality of life in Virginia is something that they can really grab onto. It's really translatable to that group too. So that's something that we've really leaned into in the past year. It's just, understanding that we don't have a lot of major weaknesses, but that there's a couple of foundational things that do stand out, even though a lot of our key competitors have those as well. So for instance, our scenery, just the outdoor assets we have, and our historical sites as well too, which I'm sure many of you have visited before too. So if we could go to the next slide. So if you think about that as kind of like we have an abundance of, attractions and offerings available, the other side of that coin is to understand our audience and those new markets. And so as part of the same study, we just wanted to understand who our travelers were. And what we landed on, we asked kind of a bunch of different attributes around travel planning and kind of the travel experience as well. And we landed on this idea of the enriched traveler as our core creative target. And you can see in the bottom left-hand corner that they're the largest section of the panel that made up this study. But at the same time, there's a lot of interesting attributes here that I think fit really well with the attributes that we have and the attractions that we offer as a state. So I like learning about and experiencing different cultures as the highest indexing remark there. That's really interesting to think about the assets we have in terms of historical sites and things like that. It's not just something that you go to, it's something that you learn and experience and you have to grapple with while you're there. And then the second item there, I like to learn stories and history unique to the destination. Learning is a little bit, a lot of people, I personally love to learn when I'm on vacation. I like to kind of experience new things. I'm not sure everybody likes to do that, but it's really interesting just to see how these travel activities kind of sit with other ones. And the other idea here that's really interesting too is that we learn by focusing on the enriched traveler, we also learn who they're not. And they aren't people who like to do as little as possible and kind of just kick back and do nothing on vacation. They also like, they like to experience, they don't like to travel to the same destination every year, while we have groups that we've surveyed that also like to do that too. So what's really interesting is that we just think that this audience is a really great application of the attributes that we offer from an attraction standpoint too. So if you can go ahead and go to the next slide, that's clear on this one as well, which is really interesting. So we asked a broad question to have our audience segments group themselves into a couple of different broad kind of trip types. So this wouldn't be as detailed as the slide that I shared earlier. But what's interesting about this slide is, we're just asking if people, are you a beach person? Are you a mountain person? Are you a history person? Small towns, theme parks, things like that. And what I really like about this slide is that you can see on the enriched bucket, there's not a lot of daylight between the beach, the mountains, and the historic attractions group. So if you think about who our target audience is, being somebody who likes to kind of experience a couple of different things while they're on vacation, Virginia offers this abundance of these different attraction types. You can go to the beach, but also experience, have a historical experience, in Williamsburg, close to Virginia Beach. You could also, you're not that far from the mountains either. I know that's a bit of a stretch, but at the same time, in Richmond, we like to say we're about 2 hours from everything, whether it's the mountains or the beach. So it's just really interesting to think about how our audience likes to kind of experience different things, and that we also have, as a state, that abundance of product too, and that we're not too concentrated in one area. So as a strategic foundation, what's really interesting just about, what I really love about what I've shown with you up to this point is that we've really tried hard to match what we have to offer as a state with who our audience is as well too. So on the next slide, this is actually getting into a new study. So this is our campaign effectiveness report that we do with SMARI every year. And because we've set that baseline and understanding who our audience is as the enriched traveler, we now have a way of qualifying that group as we move forward in our effectiveness process on an annual basis. So what's really interesting here is that now we can tell and segment out the enriched group from the other group, and we can ask them about our specific campaign that we've run targeting them. And of course, these results are wonderful for us. We're seeing that the campaign themes that we've developed from the strategic research up to this point, including abundance, just fun and excitement, something for everyone, trying new experiences. Our campaign is delivering all of that in spades. And what's really interesting as well about this slide and about this campaign in particular is that we had to do a found footage campaign this year too. So we had to go back and look through all of our historical assets and pull something together that fit the strategy that I've already laid out here in the last couple of minutes. So, clearly from this slide, we know what we have to improve on: unique culture, and kind of tying that Virginia is for lovers is a travel brand, not just kind of a quirky saying that people hashtag on Instagram when they come here. But at the same time, without the restriction of a found footage campaign, we're really kind of in the process of developing what we want to do next year with the learnings from this study, which we're really excited about. And I think just given how we understand abundance, what we're going to do with unique culture is going to be more in a creative sense, and not necessarily just trying to identify clear, unique things that are different about Virginia, but come at the advertising with a unique voice and a unique kind of photographic sense as well, so that we stand out a little bit too. So really love this slide. I think this is, again, the enriched traveler is something that's really transmissible and translatable to our stakeholders, even if they're not in the travel space as well. And it's something that they can understand because everybody knows, that we work with what we have to offer as a destination too. So those are my 5 insights. I do have a 6th one, and I'm sorry to mess with the order a little bit, but as part of this image study, what we did is we put a battery of about 20 images out to the panel, and we just asked them, what state does this remind, or what state would you identify this image with? And 2 of those images we used were, one was of Cape Charles, which is a small town of about 3,000 people on the Eastern Shore. It's very sleepy, it's very quiet, it's very nice and peaceful as well. And then the other image that we used was one of the Virginia Beach boardwalk below on the right. And if you go to the next slide, what's really interesting and what I love about this is that if you go to the Virginia Beach section that I've highlighted below first, the respondents all thought that was in South Carolina. Of course, they didn't realize that that image was in Virginia. But for the Cape Charles love work, and that's what we call that love sign, it's a program that our local DMOs and small businesses can participate in, and we subsidize the cost of manufacturing one of those love signs. Well, what I'd like to point out is notice the difference in Virginia recognition between the Virginia Beach image and then the Cape Charles sign. And then notice how much closer that is to South Carolina, versus what the generic Virginia Beach image shows. And so what I love about this insight, even if it's not something that we're using directly right now, is that we do have some brand recognition. We have some Virginia association with that love work sign too. So that's something that we're always thinking about. What does the brand mean to people that aren't aware of, Virginia's for Lovers? How do we connect that and make it more tangible? That LoveWorks program is a great way for us to do that and for us to expand that program out across the entire state. And now there's over 300 of those signs statewide as well too. So that's it for me. Really appreciate the opportunity to share what we've learned over the past year and a half with SMARI with all of you. And I'm happy to take any questions, as we move through. And I'm going to pass it over to Brandy now. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, Dan. Well, I'm Brandy Evans, Vice President of Marketing here at Visit Wichita. I am approaching my 1-year anniversary here. And so having this level of research budget is pretty new, but it's definitely exciting. So I'll jump right in with next slide. Every year, Visit Wichita does an ad effectiveness study with SMARI. They've been doing it for almost a decade now. The quantitative study looks at the return on investment in key drive markets. And for us, that is Kansas City, Missouri, Tulsa, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, Joplin, Missouri. This study allows us to see how our paid advertising affects incremental new trips to the destination, as well as perceptions of Wichita. We learned from the 2021 study that our ad influence trips were higher value, with ad influence visitors spending 5% more in a destination than it was pre-pandemic levels. Stays in Wichita were longer, and visitors were more likely to use paid accommodations. Next slide. However, traveler perceptions of Wichita remain similar to pre-pandemic levels, and most scores were generally in the middle, neither good nor bad. And we wanted to break through on our overall image of Wichita and our communication ratings and move the needle to 4 or above, which represents the top 25%. Next score. Next slide. I am more of a marketer than I am a researcher. But one of the things that I learned was that great research starts with a challenge or a question. And for us, we needed to resolve and ask ourselves, how do we use research to create a compelling TV commercial that connects with our target audiences and eventually move us to that top 25%? Next slide. And so we decided to work with SMARI and Stephanie specifically to do a creative wave test. And this was our first time to do that. And we wanted to use that research to determine which of the 3 campaigns that we had run in 2021 was the strongest in our target markets, understand the elements that make the creative compelling to visitors that generate interest and intent to travel to Wichita, and then utilize subsequent qualitative research to examine new creative executions with people in those target markets so we could further refine our commercial. Next slide. And so as a result, one of the things that we learned from that first Creative Wave study was that the best campaign to build on was the fall festivals. And it showed lots of things to see and do, and that really resonated with our visitors in those key drive markets. Some other things that we learned was that expanding the demographic and activities in the spot was important so that no one demographic felt left out. One of the 3 campaigns was called Journeys, and it focused on a couple with children and a couple with no children. And so the spot really was more about those people than it was sort of the experience, or that's what our research said. We also learned that we needed to really show what's special about Wichita to those that were less familiar with the destination so that they would feel more compelled to visit. And we did a social media digital campaign called Places, Faces, Heart. And in that campaign, what people loved the most was that they learned something that was special, interesting, unique, different, surprising about Wichita. And we realized we needed to bring some of those elements into our new TV spot as well. And then finally, providing identifying information on screen that helped people to plan a trip to Wichita. Next slide. So in March, we did a creative evaluation wave 2 study, and that study was done in 2 parts. We surveyed 400 travelers in Kansas City, Oklahoma, Tulsa, and Dallas. And we added Dallas because we had some other data sources that said that Dallas was an emerging market, that there were more and more people coming from Dallas to Wichita and more people expressing an intent to visit Wichita from that DFW market. So we wanted to know more about these people as we crafted our commercial. And one of the interesting things that they did as a part of this survey was a moment-to-moment scoring of our video footage. Having come again from a market where I didn't have a lot of resources to do research, a lot of times you just kind of depended upon sort of your gut feelings about footage and things that you thought were compelling to visitors, and certainly second, third party data points that told you. But here I got to see how people liked various scenes at our Sedgwick County Zoo, for instance, so that I could be real specific about what people cared about. From there, we did a focus group and we showed them two ads. One was a comparable spot from 2019, and then the revised spot. So we've been taking all of the data, all of the feedback that we have been gaining to create a revised 2022 spot that we could show to people and get some reactions and some feedback. So some of the key learnings from that focus group included the new ad was effective in lifting the image of Wichita and increasing the interest in the visit. Before seeing the new ad, only 61% rated Wichita as favorable or very favorable to visit. That number jumped to 75% after viewing the new ad. 39% said that they were likely to visit Wichita before seeing the ad, compared to 59% who said they would visit based on the content of the new ad. And finally, the new ad scored higher than the 2019 ad on every attribute, and it achieved excellent ratings, that top 25%. On overall reaction, makes Wichita look like a good place to visit, is believable, and shows a welcoming place to visit. Next slide. For the qualitative data, we did 2 online focus groups. We had 17 people specifically from the DFW market. And it was a cross-section of married people, single people, various familiarity with the destination, various demographics, and kids versus no kids. The other group was combined people from Kansas City, Oklahoma City, and Tulsa who had similar profiles to the travelers out of DFW. And let me tell you, Stephanie is masterful at getting all of the participants to talk. They were asked questions like, why did you choose one destination over another for a leisure trip? What made it appealing? What motivates you to travel? Then they were asked about competitive cities to Wichita. They were led through a very in-depth discussion about Wichita specifically, then shown our commercial and asked a few more questions like, what is your overall reaction to the TV spot? What's the main message in this TV commercial? Does it make you want to visit? And the focus group was so enlightening and fascinating to me. One of the findings that we discovered was that there was a song that had been in the Wichita commercials, and it was called I'm Going to Wichita, and it was a little jingle. And people either loved this song or hated it. And we got lots of locals who called and they just hated the song. But we thought people in our key markets liked it because we did get some positive feedback. But the research said people didn't like it, and that we should instead focus on telling our story via a script so that people would know more about Wichita. And after watching the focus group and them being asked what's the main message of the ad, people were literally reciting portions of that script verbatim. They were saying things like, Wichita is kind of funky, kind of fun, it has a vibe. And those were all the things that we had written into that TV spot. So it was really good to see that our message was resonating with them and that they would be able to carry that message on. Then we asked them to judge individual elements like images, music, and script. And some of what we heard from the focus groups was that it made Wichita look like a fun place to visit. And I saw many attractions and things to do that I didn't know existed. It looks as though Wichita might be an interesting place for a short visit. It did a good job in a small amount of time of showing what all there is to see and do. I've been to Wichita and it reflects what I enjoy doing with my family there quite well. I love the visual scenes, the information presented. I was really pleasantly surprised. Next slide. So the new TV spot significantly increased both the destination rating and likelihood to visit. You can see from the graphs here that their impressions of the destination increased when asked, how would you rate Wichita as a place to go for a leisure trip? And how likely are you to visit Wichita for an overnight leisure trip in the next year? Obviously, we won't know the full extent of the results of the TV and digital campaign until we do our ad effectiveness study at the end of this year. But our hope is that we will see an increase in our ROI and ad influence visitation as well as visitor spending. And of course, we'd like to meet and exceed the goals of recall and ad aware households. And finally, we want to crack that top 25% for communication ratings for the first time. And so without further ado, I would actually like to show you our commercial. And I'd like to invite you all to come and to visit me here in Wichita.
There's something happening in Wichita. Excitement, movement, a vibe. A city that offers amazing experiences delivered with heart. From arts to attractions, nightlife to sports. You feel the energy at every turn. A little fancy, a little funky, but always friendly. Come see the place we love. We think you'll love it too. Discover more at visitwichita.com.
All right, well, thank you so much, everybody, for those great presentations. I know we had some people raising hands along the way. I'd like to ask everyone to please put your questions in the Q&A and we'll read those. I wanted to start though with a question for our panelists because they're all in between their teams and the research. I think one of the reasons that the research has been so impactful for all of them is because they did such a great job of understanding what they needed from the research and being a bridge between the research and the creatives and the rest of the process. And so sometimes when we're doing creative testing, especially, that can be, a challenge to navigate between the creative team and, the rest of the marketing team. And so I wanted to start with Brandy, since she's a vice president of marketing, to talk about like how you manage that relationship between research and the ad agency.
Well, it can be a tricky one because the ad agency feels very personally tied and emotionally tied to the spot that they created. And so even when the research came back that visitors saw it as 3 different campaigns and not one, they're just like, I don't understand. And so I really kind of had to bring them along at the start of the creative wave testing and let them be a part of it. They sat in on the focus groups so that they could hear firsthand how people were responding. And I just kind of brought them all along the entire journey so that they understood the research. It wasn't me trying to communicate it back to them. And then they could take those learnings and then create a spot that was compelling.
Oh, great. Thank you. We have a question from Deanne McKinney for Dan, asking how you defined the enriched traveler.
Sure. So I'm happy to take that one. So we basically asked the panel in our image study, which was about 1,500 to 2,000 people, if I recall correctly, just kind of how they travel and how they plan for travel. And I'm looking over it, added on my other screen here. And so I think what sets it apart, that group specifically, is that they like to learn and they like to experience new things and they like to be active too. So that can be, I think, just staying busy. It doesn't have to necessarily imply that people are climbing mountains and rock climbing and doing all sorts of crazy, high adventure types of things, but that they like to be active, they like to have a lot of experiences, and that their experience is experiential, I would say too, so that they aren't really looking to go and sit on the beach for a week, and what I really love about what we were able to do with SMARI was find out who they're not and not just who they are too. So it's a little bit, beyond demographics. There's a little bit of demographic insight here. And we've kind of been chipping away at it a little bit more as we learn more about this audience, but it's well represented, I would say, generationally, but at the same time, it's a little bit higher income, which with some secondary research that we've done supports the type of traveler in our markets, especially in the Northeast too. So it's very interesting. I think there's a lot, there's still more for us to learn, and I love how much, our regional partners, our local DMOs, especially ones that are stewards of historical sites, things like that. I think it's a really great concept for them to take and run with as well, too.
And, I would add to that especially for, our other partners who are watching today, you all know that all of these segmentations and attribute lists are customized for every destination in collaboration with the client. And so, it really truly represents the experiences and the strategies and the processes that each destination has in place to develop their brands. And, rather than just kind of saying, which of these types of travelers are you, we're asking them to, tell us about their behaviors and tell us about their attitudes. And then we let statistical analysis identify these groups, and then, look to the other findings in the study to help, identify the power of various segments and the applicability of targeting each of them. So let's see, Wendy has a question. The research identified your best audiences and markets, but did it also tell you how to reach them? Donna, do you want to take that one?
A little bit. Wendy, thank you. Yes, in many of the slides I didn't share, we were looking at which geographies and which segments reacted best to which kinds of not only the message, but the medium. Were we reaching people through different kinds of placements and the stories we were telling? So yes, going back into our creative team, and most of this work was done in-house. It was a possibility for them to continue with this larger study, and something I didn't say, but I really want to call out because our focus was really the ROI, was that it wasn't just how many people came during those 6 months. It was how many people came because they saw the ad, and the ad influenced the decision. That we were really in a position then to say, what ads, not do you like it, not was it fun to watch, but was it effective in moving your decision to travel during those months? And so it was a combination of those two things, the medium and the message. And ooh, that sounds so Marshall McLuhan. Okay.
Well, I'm also going to ask Brandy and Dan to respond to that too, because I think their studies had, different approaches. Brandy was, exploring an emerging market. And, I think we found really interesting attitudinal differences, right? Do you want to speak to that?
We did. So in Kansas City, where Wichita had been advertising for years, it's always been one of the main feeder markets because of the huge population. It's a 3-hour drive east of Wichita. So they've spent a great deal of money, time, and effort to attract visitors from that area. And listening to the people who had actually been exposed to ads previously or had some familiarity or something with Wichita, they were much tougher on the destination. Dallas was a blank slate. They knew nothing, but after seeing the commercial, they were super fired up and thought, okay, it makes sense for me. And so, it kind of helped us to understand more of who that potential Dallas traveler is, how to reach them, and what kinds of things that they're interested in. They very much wanted to know more about more specifics. They cared about festivals and events and dates and that kind of thing. So
and they will drive a really long way to go somewhere. That was a really interesting.
They did not mind driving, and this was sort of after the pandemic, and we knew that many travelers were willing to travel far distances. But it's only a 5-hour drive to Dallas. They just hadn't considered us because we hadn't invited them.
And Dan, I know you've done a really deep dive on market selection.
Yeah, we're really into that, honestly. But at the same time, I think what's really interesting, I think that's an excellent question as well, is that we asked for the way that we discovered these audience segments wasn't through a segmentation study. We more just asked segmentation questions as part of our image and competitive study. just so that we could make sure we wanted to understand that competitive landscape through the travelers that we want. We wanted to ask the traveler that we want, directly, and be able to kind of segment them apart from that. So we actually didn't get an answer to that question within the study, but what we're doing now as we complete our ad effectiveness waves is we're learning what is working with that audience and what isn't working too. We're learning that they're hard to reach. Honestly, I think from a creative standpoint, that like we really have great alignment there, but from a tactical standpoint, we have room to improve. And it's because I think we're dealing with more of an experience-based targeting approach rather than just a 25 to 54 high household income, targeting approach as well. So what I really like about this though is that our agency loves all the information that they can get. It's not so much that it's they're able to take something like this and run with it, and then we can tweak it and continue to learn and move forward from there too. So so far so good. We have room to improve and our challenges and things like that. So we plan on testing our way into this audience specifically and trying to figure out as well what works in different markets too. Is there it does how and the role that proximity plays in that as well.
And I think it's really fascinating and to kind of begin to understand that, that the comp set is kind of different for every market where you're advertising, right? The places that people go to in New York and who you're competing with in New York may be very different than who you're competing with for the Atlanta market. So Ursula actually had posted our first question, which is, I think, directed to Donna. And it is, were there differences in response to the NYC campaign by ethnic group, white, Black, Hispanic, Asian, et cetera?
Yes. Corroborating things we've been seeing from other research, which is you want to see yourself in the ads. So one of the things about the ads, and I didn't share videos and other images, a lot of it is up on the website, is that we focused to a very large extent on making sure that people would see themselves in these ads by age, by gender, by sexual orientation, by ethnicity. The communities in New York that we highlighted represent the diversity of the city and the diversity of our market. So on a case by case, ad by ad basis, yes, you would see that happening. And we've been seeing that in work that we started before the pandemic that we spent a lot of time on during the pandemic in what are called content hubs. And that idea, that last slide that I shared, to see the boroughs like a Queens native or a Bronx native, what food you can eat, what music you can hear, where you can go and dance, where and how you will shop, what the cultural institutions look like. Each of those stories highlights the diversity of New York City and does speak to different communities and different aspects of the visitor population.
One of the recommendations that we had for Wichita was to, use the layers of the ad, make every scene work really hard, because they were doing a really great job of using a central talent to tell a story and see the progression through the ad, through the characters. But the opportunity was to add layers so that more demographic groups and, more types of travelers could see themselves in Wichita, even if they didn't relate very well to the characters and the talent that were featured. So we will end with this question from Chris Kavanaugh, and I'll let each of you answer it. Did any of you adjust your messaging by market, and how? I'm gonna switch that up a little bit and ask, how did you adjust your messaging based on this research?
Well, I'll go for Wichita. We completely changed our strategy and approach to the TV spot, which was our main branding tool. previous commercials all had a song, and it didn't really tell you. I mean, it was a fun song. It was like earworm. You listen to it and you'd be kind of repeating it in your head, but people still didn't exactly know what Wichita offered. And so we used the research to definitively say this song made sense or didn't make sense. And the research said it didn't. The research said that we needed to tell our story. So we went from a song and a jingle to a script in that commercial. And also we needed to add more layers, like you were saying, to the spot. People needed to be able to see themselves. So, you know, when you see the spot, there were more people, different kinds of people, different ages of people in different settings all around the city, and that it would be a little surprising. That was what we hoped we would get. And so we took a little bit of knowledge from each of the campaigns based upon that research to kind of create that one piece. So we don't have a different strategy per se in each of the different markets. That commercial is running in the various key drive markets, but in the future, we might evolve to that.
We did a lot of that testing before we got to the ROI study. So there were a number of iterations and changes, things that we had been running locally and using our social channels and our owned media and so on. One of the key things that comes back is even with a destination that's as well known as New York, the iconic images transmit sometimes more than all the other words and pictures you can put out there. So our videos and our stories and other things went in to depth, but there was testing done before we got down to that last round of not only was it great advertising, but it was great advertising that actually moved the needle on spending and ROI.
Oh.
Yeah, and for us in Virginia, we're not planning, well, first of all, we didn't vary our messaging approach by market, and we were kind of limited with the found footage campaign that we had in the past year as well. But what I think we're learning is that you know, for based on proximity and just the frequency of visit and kind of the already the top of mind, like you know, favorability that we already have in some of our markets, I think next year what we're planning on doing is having a two-tiered approach of more markets that are further away being more of an awareness play, just making sure that they're thinking about us and that we're top of mind for them. But then for the markets that we already have strong visitation for, just making sure that they get here as well. So that'd be more of a mid to lower funnel approach for next year. So we're really, you know, going to be empowered with what we're learning this year in terms of what's working, but we'll also have a brand new campaign to really, you know, develop what we've learned about abundance and the enriched traveler too. So we're really looking forward to that.
All right, well, that's our hour. Thank you all so much
Thank
for
you.
sharing your wisdom. And, you know, it's so interesting to hear you talk and hear your passion for what you do shine through. Thanks to everyone who joined us today. I hope you consider it an hour well spent, and we'll look forward to seeing you all on the road sometime soon. So thanks, everybody.
Thank
Have a
you.
good
Bye.